The perfectionist, frozen by the fear of not being good enough. Start with the type that surprises people because it looks like the opposite of procrastination. The perfectionist does not delay out of indifference. They delay because they care so intensely that the fear of producing something flawed becomes paralyzing. If the work cannot be perfect, starting it means risking failure, and not starting feels safer than starting badly. The emotion driving this one is fear of failure, dressed up as high standards. As long as you have not started, the project can still be brilliant in your imagination. The moment you begin, it becomes a real, imperfect thing that can be judged. So the perfectionist stalls at the starting line, protecting a fantasy of flawlessness by never testing it against reality. The fix is to deliberately lower the bar for the first attempt. Give yourself explicit permission to produce a rough, ugly, deliberately imperfect first version, on the understanding that you cannot edit a blank page, but you can always improve a bad one. Separating the act of creating from the act of judging, make first, refine later, removes the exact threat that freezes the perfectionist in place. The dreamer in love with the idea, allergic to the steps. Now, the type bursting with vision and starved of action. The dreamer loves the big picture, the finished novel, the launched business, the transformed life, and finds genuine pleasure in imagining it. What they avoid is the unglamorous, concrete, often tedious first steps required to make any of it real, because those steps feel small and dull next to the shining vision. The emotion underneath is a kind of aversion to the mundane, combined with the way a vague dream feels better than a specific task. Write a book is thrilling. Write 300 words about chapter 1 before lunch is not. The dreamer keeps living in the inspiring abstraction because the abstraction is pleasant, and the concrete first step is boring, fiddly, and slightly threatening in its realness. The fix is ruthless specificity. The dream has to be broken down into a next action so small and so concrete that it cannot be dreamed about, only done. Not start the business, but spend 10 minutes writing one sentence describing what it sells. The dreamer's whole problem is the gap between vision and step, so the solution is to make the very next step almost insultingly small and clear. The avoider, running from judgment. Here's the type most clearly tied to anxiety. The avoider procrastinates on tasks that carry the risk of being evaluated by a boss, a client, a teacher, an audience, because the prospect of judgment is so uncomfortable that avoiding the task feels like avoiding the threat. They are not running from the work itself, they are running from being seen and assessed doing it. The emotion here is fear of being judged, which can attach to fear of failure or, interestingly, even fear of success and the new expectations it would bring. Either way, the task becomes a source of dread, and procrastination offers exactly what dread craves, a way to not face the threatening thing right now. The relief is real, which is why the pattern is so sticky. The fix works by shrinking the perceived threat. Reframe the task as low stakes and private, rather than high stakes and exposed. A draft no one will see yet, a practice attempt that does not count, a first pass meant only for you. Separating the act of doing from the moment of being judged lets the avoider engage with the work before the evaluation anxiety has anything to grab onto. The crisis maker, addicted to last minute pressure. Now, the type who will swear procrastination is their superpower. The crisis maker leaves everything until the last possible moment and then produces it in a frantic, adrenaline fueled sprint. And because it usually gets done, they conclude they work best under pressure. Often, they genuinely believe the looming deadline is the only thing that lets them focus at all. The emotion underneath is more complicated than it looks. The early calm period of a task is full of low grade anxiety and resistance. The deadline, when it finally arrives, drowns that out with pure urgency, which paradoxically feels easier than the slow background dread. So the crisis maker is not really choosing pressure for performance. They are using the deadline to escape the discomfort of starting early. The fix is to manufacture earlier, smaller pressure rather than relying on one terrifying deadline at the end. Self-imposed mini deadlines, public commitments, or accountability to another person create urgency in stages instead of all at once. It also helps to be honest that I work best under pressure usually means I only work under pressure, and that the stress, the lower quality, and the lack of margin for things going wrong are real costs, not a personality. The overwhelmed, frozen by a task too big to hold. Here's the type whose procrastination is closest to a genuine freeze. Faced with a task so large, complex, or undefined that they cannot even see where it begins, the overwhelmed person does not avoid it casually. They shut down. The task looms as a single, intimidating mass, and the brain, unable to find a foothold, responds by retreating to something small and manageable instead. The emotion here is overwhelm itself, the sense that the task is bigger than your capacity to face it. A huge, vague project triggers a stress response that makes everything about it feel threatening. And since you cannot avoid the feeling, you avoid the task that produces it. The classic tell is doing lots of small, easy, unrelated things while the big one sits untouched. Productive looking avoidance. The fix is decomposition. The overwhelming task task has to be broken into pieces small enough to stop triggering the freeze. Not do my taxes, but find last year's return, a step so specific and small it feels safe to begin. The overwhelmed procrastinator does not need more discipline. They need the mountain cut into steps because the freeze lifts the moment a single doable first action comes into view. The indecisive, stalled by too many choices. Now, a type that gets stuck before the work even starts, at the level of deciding. The indecisive procrastinator cannot move because they cannot choose which option, which approach, which path, and so they remain frozen at the fork in the road, researching and weighing endlessly while doing nothing. The deciding becomes its own form of avoidance. The emotion underneath is the fear of making the wrong choice and the discomfort that fear produces. Every option carries the risk of regret, and as long as no choice is made, no wrong choice can be made either. So the indecisive person stays in the comfortable limbo of still deciding, which feels responsible, all that careful weighing, but is functionally just procrastination wearing the costume of diligence. The fix is to recognize that for most decisions, choosing imperfectly and moving beats choosing perfectly and never starting. Setting a firm time limit on the decision or accepting that a good enough choice made now is worth more than a perfect choice made too late breaks the paralysis. Often the cost of any reasonable choice is tiny next to the cost of the endless delay the indecision creates. The busy procrastinator, hiding behind productive tasks. Here is the sneakiest type of all because it does not look like procrastination at all. The busy procrastinator avoids the one important, uncomfortable task by burying themselves in a flurry of other easier tasks, answering emails, tidying, reorganizing, running errands, and ends the day genuinely busy, genuinely tired, and no closer to the thing that actually mattered. The emotion is the same avoidance as every other type, but disguised, which makes it especially dangerous. Because the day was full of real activity, it feels productive, and the comforting story, I was so busy, hides the fact that the busyness was carefully selected to be everything except the threatening task. The relief comes not from doing nothing, but from doing anything other than the hard thing. The fix is to identify the single most important task each day and protect it before the easy ones are allowed to crowd in. Doing the dreaded thing first while your attention is freshest, so the day's busy work cannot become an alibi for avoiding it. It also helps to ask honestly when you feel productively busy whether the busyness is genuine progress or simply a more respectable form of running away. The distracted, losing to a world built to interrupt. And finally, the type magnified enormously by modern life. The distracted procrastinator does not necessarily dread the task or fear judgment. They simply keep getting pulled away by something easier and more stimulating because the escape is always one tap away. Every moment of friction in the real task becomes an exit toward a feed, a message, a video, and the hours quietly disappear. The emotion driving this is the brain's pull toward immediate, easy reward over slow, effortful work, and the modern environment is engineered to exploit it relentlessly. The task offers delayed, uncertain payoff. The phone offers instant, reliable stimulation. So at every small point of resistance, the distracted procrastinator drifts toward the easy hit, not from a deep emotional block, but from sheer, ever-present availability of something more tempting. The fix is environmental rather than emotional. Remove the distractions instead of relying on willpower to resist them. Put the phone in another room, block the sights, create physical friction between you and the easy escape, so that staying on task becomes the path of least resistance. The distracted procrastinator does not need more discipline. They need an environment where avoidance is no longer effortless. So here's the insight that ties every type together. Procrastination is never really about laziness or time management. It is about emotion, and each type on this list is a different emotion driving the same act of avoidance, rewarded by the same hit of temporary relief that keeps the whole loop spinning. The perfectionist fears imperfection. The dreamer avoids the mundane. The avoider fears judgment. The crisis maker escapes the dread of starting early. The overwhelmed freeze at a task too big. The indecisive fear the wrong choice. The busy procrastinator hides in easy work, and the distracted lose to a world built to interrupt them. Same behavior, 8 different engines, which is exactly why one generic fix could never work for all of them. Once you can name your type, the right solution stops being try harder and becomes specific. Lower the bar, shrink the step, make it private, add earlier pressure, break it down, set a decision deadline, do the hard thing first, or remove the distraction. You stop fighting a vague character flaw and start solving a precise, nameable problem. So tell me in the comments, which type are you, or which blend of 2 or 3? Name the emotion you now realize has been underneath your avoidance all along. Seeing it clearly is genuinely most of the battle. If you want part 2, a deeper look at the 5-minute start, self-compassion, and the exact tactics that disarm each type, hit like and subscribe. New video every week.